Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George and I'm wearing my new Eons of Battle t-shirt that I got from my favorite YouTube channel devoted to all things Warhammer 40k and nerds being nerds together. Check it out. It's a pretty cool channel. However, today's video is about, well, one of these. I got these from the pre-order. They're new to the Tau range. We've got Dark Strider and we've got the Tau Ethereal. I'm going to pick one. Let's try the Tau Ethereal. Let's do some quick painting on this guy. He looks pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't be a big project. I'm going to put them together, prime them, and then start getting ready to give it a decent paint. Come join me, will you? So here is my Ethereal. He looks pretty cool. Although he's a lot more delicate than the models I'm used to. I guess I've painted a lot of Space Marines recently. This guy is slim and kind of fragile looking, but he's still pretty awesome. The pose is really regal. There's an awful lot of cape about this guy, which is going to be a problem for me. So there's that. But I'm going to still use quick painting techniques, you know, the Basecoat Glaze and the washes to make this look really nice without spending a ton of time on it. But before I go into the plan for the painting, I want to share with you just a little bit of my commentary on the building process. So I'm going to go with a custom base. I've got drilled out a little space for a magnet here. It's just a resin base. It's going to be kind of a concrete. It's not going to be a major focus of attention, but I replaced the base because this Ethereal is going to be standing on this kind of drone-looking platform. And he didn't. The platform didn't really want to stand straight on the base it originally came in. It kind of had this weird slant, and so then the Ethereal would be kind of on the base, kind of hanging out like that, and I just didn't like it at all. So what I've done is I've prepared this magnetized mount thing, and so I'm going to glue this on here, kind of like so, and on top of that, I'm going to have this magnetized base attached to, well, the base, and then the Ethereal will be standing on top of this platform, and so it'll look a little bit more natural, and I can control the angle. So this magnetizing, this flying stand, it's something I do for a lot of my Tau drone bases, and while it was a commendable attempt to try to keep this flying stand from being one of these transparent things. It just didn't really work, or at least for me. There's also kind of this ugly looking seam. You can kind of see it right there on the model, and you could probably seal it with some green stuff if you're good at it. I am not, so I know that if I go in and try to seal it off with some green stuff, it's gonna make matters worse. I'm really not good at sculpting, so I'm going to leave it as is, just so that I don't do more damage than I would normally. I gave this a prime with like a desert brown. It's some of the last bits in my Krylon camouflage rattle can. I'm a little sad that it's almost gone, but I'm going to make some solid use of it here. So the basic color scheme for our Ethereal is going to be dark gray with bright blue, and so the armor for the most part is going to be the dark gray, and so inside here, so up his skirt, you're not going to be able to see a ton of stuff, so I'm just going to hit it with the gray And I'm going to darken that up nicely in most spots. Some of the stuff that's visible, I'll leave that and paint that separately. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty dark in here, so it's just going to be gray. So for my Ethereal's robes, I'm going to go with just some glazing of deep blue. I want to start it off kind of dark and kind of go from there. The plan is for the blue of his robe to be a different kind of blue than the blue that's I use as an accent for my towel models. So I'm going to go with this glaze and hope that I can do a better job with this cape than I've done in the past. There is this kind of middle, I don't know, tabard thing coming off his belt. I'm going to make that a different color, maybe like an orange or something like that. But that robe is done-ish. I'm going to let it dry and see what that looks like. I really like that blue. I'm kind of hoping that I can keep it looking decent in subsequent steps, but for Basecoat Glaze, it looks pretty good. It's nice and deep. Yeah. So I'm going to move on to start glazing up the torso armor. And so I'm going to use a light gray for this, and any of the other kind of basic armor components. This is part of the color scheme for my towel, is gray and blue. So I'm going to put down just a thin coat of this Basecoat Glaze. Later on I'll do some stuff to it, but the first step is just get this glaze, the primary coat on it. Probably will end up doing a second coat just to do away with any of the streakiness that sometimes shows up. Alright, that looks pretty decent. Making some progress. I think the next step here is to start adding a little bit of color, additional color. And so I'm going to hit that tabard that our Ethereal has. I'm going to go with a bit of purple. It's called Grimoire Purple. And it should be okay. I'm just going to add it to here and maybe the inside of the robe. I may have actually watered it down too much. I'm trying a bit of a different approach on how I mix my paints so I can be a bit more precise. I think it's a decent attempt for a hero model, so you want to be a bit more careful. I'm going to do a little try-harding here, but I'm relatively inexperienced, so it's going to be some adjustment. I'll wipe off a lot of this watery excess. And this is going to almost certainly require 2 coats, and that's okay. I'm going to start introducing a bit of flat black. Since I avoid metallics on my towel, I use black to represent metallics, metallic-like things. So the spear, the haft of the spear is going to be black. I'm also going to go in any of those little Tau symbols. I'm going to prep those in black, although those are going to serve as an undercoat for actual metallic. It's the only time I use metallics in my Tau army is for those symbols, but I want to make sure that they're undercoated in black so that those metallics have room to shine. For my skin tones, I'm going to go with a really bright teal. So I'm going to keep this glaze nice and thin. It's going to be it's a really bright blue for skin tone, I think, but that's okay. This is just the base coat. I'm going to do some fancy stuff to this to make it look a little less weird, hopefully. But I do want to have a nice bright base, so it's clear that our Tau Ethereal here is alien, not just a blue human without a nose. There's a lot of colors happening on this model. It's a little weird for me. I'm more of a black, white, and gray kind of guy. But I decided I needed more colors in my life, and so this guy's shaping up to be pretty colorful and bright. Let's hope he doesn't look weird. So the last bit of base coat I'm going to apply is some black to our friend's boots. I know some people think that these are, I don't know, his feet or Tau go to battle barefoot. It seems like a bad tactical decision. So I just assumed that these are boots because Tau, if nothing else, they are not bad tacticians. So, boots it is. Alright, the base coat glaze portion of this show is complete. All the major elements of color are on this model. So now it is time for the real star of the show, and that is the washes. The washes are going to help bring some depth to these models, bring out some of those details, and do so without a bunch of work. This model has a lot of great elements, and on my Tau army, the way I highlight, or I basically do panel lining the laziest way possible, and that's by using a dark wash. And so that helps me bring down the tone of the gray armor, so it darkens it up a bit, but it also collects on those little recesses and makes it easy for people to pick up the detail without me having to go in there and manually do any panel lining, which looks awesome, but it looks like a lot of work. And for that task, this time around, I'm using Nuln Oil. I hadn't used this before, but I recently ran a test of the dark washes and how they behave differently. And I really like what this does. And what it does is it really collects in those tiny little recessed areas without darkening up the raised areas too much. So it's a more delicate dark wash than my normal Army Painter dark tone. So I'm hoping to take advantage of those properties to best use on this model. So I'm just going to throw that wash on the gray, any parts of this model that are supposed to be gray. And I want to make absolutely sure that I do a good job with the pooling. Now, Army Painter's Nuln Oil doesn't pool the same way that, Games Workshop, Citadel Colors Nuln Oil doesn't pool the same way that Army Painter's Dark Tone does, so you're going to have to do some experimenting with this. It seems a little less viscous, so overall it's just a more delicate wash, so you want to pay attention. If you're using one, or you're used to using one, and now you're going to try another one, just make sure that you get some practice in there, or at least you're vigilant to make sure that things are working the way you expect. Alright, so that's what that looks like. Looks pretty good so far. It looks cleaner than the Army Painter's dark tone, but the proof is in the pudding, or in this case, in the drying. The next wash I'm going to apply is Army Painter's Blue Tone. And I'm going to hit all the parts of the model that are blue. The idea here is to incorporate some easy shadows. So the robe is going to get this. The skin is also going to get this since it's primarily blue. Thankfully for the purple part of that robe, I do have a purple tone that I'm going to use. I don't think I've used it very much. It's relatively new to my painting kit, so I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I imagine it's going to be a lot like Army Painter's other washes. I think the really scary part of this process is adding the blue tone to the skin of our Ethereal here, because I want him to be alien, but I also want him to look kind of natural, and I think this blue tone is going to help. But how much blue is too much blue? That is an excellent question, with answers only showing up when the model is done, and the mistakes are baked in for the most part. I'm going to start working on the purple tone now. And so one of the things that I've done in the past is I haven't gone with a complete color match. And what I mean by that is, for the most part, I'll use blue tone if I have a blue color that I'm working on, that I'm shading, that I'm washing. But that isn't always the case. With this purple, let's say you don't have a purple tone, or maybe you want to go with a different effect. You could, for example, use a red tone. You could use a blue tone to make that glaze, or make their shadows look a little different, and it gives the overall color a different kind of note. It's going to be, slightly different. And using a component color, so for example, purple is a mixture of red and blue, right? If you use either a red or a blue tone, you kind of emphasize one of those components over the other, and it could sometimes look cool, sometimes it looks kind of weird, and that's okay. Experimentation is the spice of life. Unless you're married, don't experiment that much. There are certain boundaries. All right, so the washes are all applied, and I'm going to let this dry. We'll come back to see what this looks like in a bit. Here's this guy so far. Looks pretty decent. I can't complain. I'm going to start adding a few details, and I'm going to start with the kind of the armor accents. I have a different color blue that I use, and so I'm just going to pick out a few of these accents. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of weapon bronze. It's a metallic paint to these little sigils, these little icons that our little friend here has. It's the only bit of metallic my Tau tend to have. And I'm not going to leave it bronze. I'm going to go over it a couple of times to make sure that it pops. Alright, we've got our ethereal dude basically done. I've got a couple of things that I want to do before I finish him off, and that involves I've got a couple of things that I want to do before I finish him off, and that's mostly some dry brushing. So there's two spots I need to dry brush. First off, you'll see that shiny stuff. That's the gold, the bronze kind of medallion kind of stuff. I've went ahead and added the dark tone so that you can kind of see the crevices there. Those are nice and black. but I do want to add a little bit of highlighting to the face. And so there's a couple of ways of going about this. I'm going to go a little bit more adventurous. I'm going to break out some off-white, some skeleton bone. I'm going to make sure my dry brush is nice and dry because I want to be subtle about it. And so I'm just going to hit him on the raised areas. It's going to look a little odd because of the blue, but it's going to be fine. Hit those fingers. And yeah, so the dry brush kind of helps us add some highlights without spending a ton of time on it. You know, adding them manually. They're not as precise as you would have with other techniques, but it is quick, and I'm all about the quick. So that's what he looks like with a little bit of dry brushing. It's a little rough, but I find that it helps. Once you do that, you let it dry. If you go back with another coat of your tone or some other kind of glaze, it'll kind of blend it into the original color, so it stands out a little less. It looks a little less weird. And with my dry brush, just gonna lightly touch that bronze to give it a shiny silver sheen. It'll soften up the yellow. It'll make it look more like a soft gold. Depending on the surface that you're doing this to, like, you could be a little more heavy, you could be a little less heavy. Alright, I think our ethereal is ready for a light coat of varnish, but first I need to add a few of these guys to the base. Now I know what you're thinking. George, you're thinking, you've got a rock base. It's clearly a rock. How is there grass tufts on that rock? To which I can apply two defenses. One of them is the Jeff Goldblum defense, and that's the life finds a way. It wouldn't surprise me to see grass growing inside of rocks or out of rocks. Grass will do what it wants to do. So I did pick a color that was kind of fit the theme, but also grass tufts really help the model's base look good. I would try it both with and without, and even when it doesn't really make sense, the grass tufts just adds something. It adds a finishing feel to the model, at least to my eye. So I use these guys. This is not sponsored, but so far these are one of my favorite grass tufts. They come in these little irregular shapes. The glue is pretty decent. And I put them on the bases before I varnish. I feel like it helps them stick to the base a little bit better. That's probably all in my head, but what are you going to do? So, I'm going to get some flat varnish on this guy, and we're set. But in order to do that, I need to protect our little steel ball and already kind of matted down dealing bob there, our flight stand, with a little silly putty. I use this to mask the stuff I don't want to get the matte varnish, which is really just the steel ball and the clear rod that's there. Doesn't have to be an exact fit. An approximate fit will do. But I don't want that glass acrylic rod to be any cloudier than it already is. Here's my towel ethereal. He's all done. He's got a nice little layer of varnish. So he's ready. Well, I was going to say he's ready for the tabletop, but honestly, for me, there's no tabletop. He's going to go right into my little case and sit there looking pretty. And that's okay. So this project was a little different for me in that there's a lot more colors than I usually do. I use a lot of grays, blacks for sure, but this one there's a lot of blue, that purple there. I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. Oddly enough, I'm not really a fan of this guy's face. Now, there's nothing actually wrong with his face. It's just the way I painted it. The dry brush and then blue tone that I put over it, it just didn't look the way I wanted it to. I wanted it to blend a little more. I could have spent a lot more time on the face, but I didn't. So, here, tabletop standard, he's pretty good for that. You can field him without feeling any kind of shame, but there's definitely room for improvement. This is, after all, this is an elite. He's a member of the HQ. He leads your Tau army. You could afford to spend a little bit more time with him to make him look, as cool as he could possibly look. Another thing I want to say about this is that he actually looks pretty good. Like, I've had a lot of trouble with capes. And I don't know what it is. They're my kryptonite, they're my Achilles they're my kryptonite heel. How about that? I don't know how that works. The whole point is that I'm bad at capes, and this doesn't look so bad. I mean, I didn't try to do any blending. This is just the Basecoat Glaze, a couple of nice coats. There's a little bit of transparency there to help the undercoat kind of show through and provide those highlights. The blue tone, those the washes from Army Painter, they did a good job of adding some shadows. They're not all in the places that I would like to have them. As a case in point, that tabard there, you'll notice there's two major pools of shadow, and they're both. So this one at the bottom, it's kind of where it would belong, but not that much. This one here, that really doesn't belong there. It should go kind of under here, it should go below the crease, not above the crease. But that's just the way the wash is dried, and you know what? For a tabletop standard, that will be fine. It's fine. It provides that visual interest. There's some variation in the color, and if the person that is looking at this model looks at it a lot closely, he's going to look, or he or she's going to find some of the flaws. But from here, he just looks blue and purple. I think it's fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you have a little bit of extra time, if you have a little bit of extra skill, this is one of those models that you want to embellish a bit. Really kind of work on those highlights and shadows, manually to kind of do a better job. And that's certainly one of my intentions. Is I want to get models like this and just work on the capes, adding those highlights and doing some blending. It's something that I've avoided. Because for the most part, I want to make decent models for this video. I don't want to produce absolute garbage. Although on occasion I have inflicted some of that garbage on you, and I apologize. I'm just not very good. But I am getting better. And sometimes I do better than other times. It's all part of the learning process. Thank you very much for watching today. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to leave a like or a subscribe, or tell a friend who's into the hobby. Maybe that person will learn a little bit something about painting their models quickly, easily, and to a decent tabletop standard. Have a wonderful afternoon, be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.